The boy's cry sliced through the cabin before the plane even left the ground. Reed Langston, whose life was built on silence and efficiency, grimaced behind his noise-canceling headphones. But then he saw her, the woman in seat 14C, holding a small boy who looked feverish, whispering words that didn't belong to any one language. Tranquilo, mi amor. Shh, ça va aller, guzalim. Spanish, French, Turkish. Each phrase rolled effortlessly into the next, soft as water. The boy calmed almost instantly, his head burrowing against her shoulder. Reed lowered his headphones, curiosity overtaking irritation. He wasn't used to being surprised. Billionaires rarely are. When the flight attendant arrived, flustered by a seating issue in the first-class cabin, the woman stood and apologized, in perfect German. Entschuldigen Sie, it's okay. We can wait. Then, turning back to her son, she murmured something in Italian. Reed found himself staring, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because her words seemed to rearrange the air itself. There was no performance, no arrogance, just precision and gentleness intertwined. He caught the attendant's eye and said, "Switch her seat with mine." The attendant blinked. "Sir? I'm moving to 14C. Minutes later, he was sitting beside her. The mother looked startled when he handed over his ticket, but gratitude flickered in her eyes. "Thank you, but you don't have to." "It's fine," Reed interrupted. "I work better in coach anyway." Her lips twitched in amusement. "That's the first time I've heard that." "Consider it an experiment." She smiled in a small, cautious smile. "Then thank you, Mr. Langston." Recognition flashed in her eyes. "As in Langston Biotech?" He inclined his head. "You've heard of it." "I used to translate clinical papers for one of your subsidiaries," she said. "They didn't pay well." He almost laughed. "That sounds about right." Her gaze didn't flinch. "I sent 3 emails suggesting improvements to their translation process. None of them were answered." Reed tilted his head. "You're not afraid to tell me that?" "I'm too tired to be afraid," she said simply, adjusting her son's blanket. "And honesty's cheaper than therapy." That line made him smile despite himself. An hour into the flight, turbulence hit. Trays rattled, passengers gasped, and her son whimpered in his sleep. Without thinking, Reed steadied the cup in her hand. Their fingers brushed, light as a thought. She looked at him then, not the way people usually looked at him, with calculation or awe, but with calm awareness. "You don't like flying, do you?" she asked. He blinked. "Excuse me." "You held your breath when the engines shifted power, and your right hand twitched when the captain spoke." He didn't answer. "I translate people too," she added quietly. That silenced him far more effectively than turbulence. When the plane leveled, Reed turned toward her again. "You said you worked in translation. Which languages?" She glanced out the window before answering. 7 fluently, another 5 conversationally. He raised a brow. "You collect them?" "They collected me," she said. "My father moved us every 2 years. Words were the only things I could keep." He studied her, the faint circles under her eyes, the careful economy of her movements. "You make it sound like survival." It was. Her son stirred and muttered something in Korean. She responded instantly, switching tongues without missing a beat. Reed felt something unfamiliar, admiration that wasn't intellectual, but human. When the boy fell asleep again, Reed said, "You ever think of using that talent in business?" She smiled faintly. "I already do. I teach language ethics. It's about what people mean when they don't say what they mean." "That's a billion-dollar concept," he said. "I charge by the hour." He chuckled. "You should charge by the mistake avoided." "I tried that once," she said. "People don't like paying for what didn't go wrong." By the time the flight began its descent, Reed realized he hadn't opened his laptop once. The attendant passed, reminding them to fasten seatbelts. Camille, he'd learned her name when the customs form dropped from her lap, tucked it beside her and turned to him. "You're heading to Zurich, right?" she asked. He nodded. "Conference. And you?" "I live there now," she said. "Sort of. My son's father was Swiss." "Was?" "Past tense." He caught the tone, the edge of loss wrapped in understatement. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Don't be. Some stories just stop translating after a while." He wanted to ask more, but the engines roared and the seatbelt sign blinked on. When they landed, Reed waited by the gate as she gathered her things. "Camille," he said as she hoisted her sleeping son, "if you ever get tired of teaching—" She looked over her shoulder. "Yes? Come see me. My company could use someone who understands what words are really worth." She hesitated, a flicker of suspicion, of self-protection. Then she nodded once. "Maybe I'll consider it." "Good," she smiled faintly, "but only if you promise to actually answer your emails." He laughed. "I'll do my best." As she walked away through the crowd, Reed Langston, a man who'd made billions solving complex systems, realized something deeply unsettling. For the first time in years, he wanted to understand something he couldn't measure, and her name was Camille Doyle. Reed Langston had attended hundreds of meetings across 3 continents, but none where his focus drifted so completely from profit margins. He kept glancing at the woman sitting 2 seats away from him, the same one from the flight, now dressed in a blazer that didn't quite fit but carried itself with quiet defiance. Camille Doyle. She sat at the far end of the long oak table, notebook open, pen steady, as the board members exchanged multilingual chaos. French bled into German, which tangled with English. Reed watched her track each speaker, her expression unreadable. When the translator misinterpreted a phrase about intellectual property consolidation, Camille's pen stopped midair. "That's not what he said," she murmured. Reed looked at her. "What did he say then?" She hesitated, aware of every set of eyes on her. "He said appropriation, not consolidation. It implies ownership transfer, not partnership." A murmur rippled through the table. The legal counsel frowned, flipping pages. "That changes the clause entirely," he muttered. Reed leaned back, watching her, the single calm voice in a storm of suits. "Ms. Doyle," he said finally, "you're not on the payroll, but would you mind staying until this is done?" She blinked. "You want me to interpret?" "I want you to tell me what's actually being said." By the 3rd hour, her coffee was cold, but her mind sharp. She navigated idioms like tightropes, reformulating legal phrasing so smoothly that even the skeptics stopped interrupting. At one point, Reed's partner from Berlin turned to him, exasperated. "Where did you find her?" 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, Reed replied. Camille almost smiled. When the meeting finally adjourned, the board members left with polite nods and unspoken disbelief. Reed lingered. "You do realize you just saved us from signing away $2 million worth of data rights," he said. Camille shrugged, exhausted. "You're welcome." "I don't recall saying thank you." "You're welcome anyway." That earned a rare laugh from him. Short, genuine, unfamiliar even to his own ears. Outside the glass doors, Zurich stretched beneath a pale winter sun. Reed gestured toward the lobby cafe. "You have 10 minutes before your flight home?" "Home is Zurich now," she said. "Teaching contract. Language ethics at the university." He paused, considering her. "Ethics? Words have consequences. People forget that when they're being paid to win arguments." Reed's mouth curved slightly. "You're wasted in academia. Not everyone wants to be a billionaire." "Good," he said evenly. "That's my job." She laughed. The first real laugh since the flight. It wasn't melodic, but it was disarming in its sincerity. He sipped his coffee. "You're fluent in 7 languages?" 8, if you count sarcasm. He nodded approvingly. "That's a valuable dialect." When they stepped back into the lobby, his assistant intercepted with a tablet. "Mr. Langston, the Zurich office wants final approval on the multilingual protocol revisions." "Send them to Ms. Doyle," Reed said without missing a beat. The assistant blinked. "To Ms. Doyle?" "She's reviewing them." Camille raised an eyebrow. "I am." "You are," Reed confirmed. "Apparently I've learned not to trust people who can only think in one language." Before she could protest, he added quietly, "And you see things I don't." That night, Camille received an email marked Urgent LBT Protocol Draft. Attached were 30 pages of multilingual legal text, dense, mechanical, and riddled with contradictions. She almost ignored it. But then she remembered Reed's tone, that deliberate stillness of someone who rarely trusted anyone, but somehow, inexplicably, had chosen her. By midnight, she'd restructured half the document. Where lawyers used jargon, she replaced it with clarity. Where intent was buried under technical precision, she drew it out into plain truth. At 2:14 a.m., she sent the revised file with a single note. Words should never hide meaning. CD the next morning, Reed opened the document at his desk overlooking Lake Zurich. He read it once, then again. Slower this time. The edits weren't just linguistic. They were philosophical. Every paragraph carried intention, as if someone had translated logic into empathy. He forwarded it to his partner with the comment, "Implement this version. No further changes." Then he typed another email, brief and to the point. From Reed Langston to Camille Doyle. Subject, your review. You were right. Words have consequences. Also, I owe you dinner. As research. He hit send before he could change his mind. That evening, as Camille walked along the Bahnhofstrasse, snow flurries caught in her hair, her phone buzzed. She read his message twice, torn between laughter and disbelief. She typed back only 2 words. Define research. Reed's reply came less than a minute later. Translation, discovering what makes people like you impossible to ignore. She smiled despite herself, tucking the phone away. Somewhere between the flight and this moment, the world had shifted slightly on its axis, just enough to make her wonder what kind of man could listen that closely, and what it would mean if she started listening back. Camille hadn't planned on returning to Langston Biotech. She told herself the first meeting was an exception. A favor done, a misunderstanding corrected, a door politely closed afterward. But a week later, another email arrived, this time not from Reed. To C. Doyle. Subject, internal review request. The CEO has recommended your oversight on language compliance for our European division. Please confirm availability. D. Koenig, head of strategy. She reread it twice. The tone was as cold as the winter wind outside her apartment. Still, she typed a brief reply. Available for consultation, one time only. She told herself it wasn't curiosity that made her say yes. It was professional integrity. Langston Biotech Zurich was nothing like the university halls she'd grown used to. All glass, precision, and silence. The kind of silence that didn't invite thought. It demanded results. Koenig met her in the lobby. Mid-40s, immaculate suit, expression carved from skepticism. You're the linguist, he said, shaking her hand like it was a transaction. Reed speaks highly of you. Does that surprise you? Reed doesn't usually speak highly of anyone. He gestured toward a conference room with a panoramic view of the lake. He's not here today, board meetings in Boston, but he asked me to show you the contract draft. She nodded. Fine. As Koenig handed her the folder, he added lightly, between us, don't expect this position to last. Reed tends to collect projects. Camille looked him dead in the eye. Then I'll make sure I'm not one of them. She spent hours buried in the document, dissecting clauses written in 5 languages. Legal hybrids so dense they almost obscured meaning. But Camille didn't translate words. She untangled intent. At one point, she caught a deliberate mistranslation buried deep in the French section. A clause that shifted liability from Langston Biotech to an independent supplier. Clever, quiet, and expensive. When she pointed it out, Koenig frowned. That's an approved version. It's also illegal, she said calmly, and it's written to look like an accident. Koenig's expression darkened. I'll handle it. I already did, she replied. I've highlighted every inconsistency. They're not just translation errors. They're deliberate manipulations. Someone's sabotaging this deal. Do you have proof? Words are proof. He studied her for a moment, then exhaled sharply. You sound like him. She arched a brow. Is that an insult? Koenig gave a thin smile. That depends on how long you survive here. When Reed returned 3 days later, Camille was still at the Zurich office, finishing revisions. He appeared at her doorway without announcement, his usual stillness offset by the faint exhaustion of travel. You were supposed to consult, not rebuild my company, he said. She didn't look up. You might want to check who you're trusting in strategy. Someone's been rewriting clauses in French. He froze. Koenig's team? She nodded. And they were smart. Buried the switch under terminology that looks benign unless you're fluent in both dialects. Reed moved closer, scanning the document. You caught this by instinct? By listening, she said simply, to what the language didn't want me to see. He smiled faintly. You realize you just saved me from losing 50 million euros. I realize I just made enemies. Don't worry, he said. You have me. She looked up at him then, searching for irony, but found none. Later that evening, Reed invited her for dinner, insisting it was business-related. She almost refused, but something in his tone, not command, but quiet insistence, made her accept. They met at a small restaurant overlooking the river. He ordered wine. She chose tea. The contrast amused them both. So, he said, leaning back, you've already terrified my head of strategy. Congratulations. He tried to intimidate me first, she replied. Didn't work. I'm not surprised. She stirred her tea. You realize your company's problem isn't translation, it's trust. Too many people speak only in profit. And you? He asked softly. What do you speak in? Consequences. He smiled at that. Not the polished CEO smile, but something quieter. You sound like my mother. Camille tilted her head. Was she a linguist too? He hesitated. A diplomat. She believed the right words could end wars. I used to think that was naive. And now? He met her eyes. Now I'm sitting across from someone proving she was right. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was a language all its own. When they left, snow had begun to fall. Reed offered her his coat. She refused twice before finally giving in. At her apartment building, he stopped at the gate. You don't owe me loyalty, Camille. But if you ever need protection from what this job will turn into, you have it. She studied him, reading the sincerity behind the words. Why are you really doing this? He exhaled, breath clouding in the cold air. Because I spent years building something that speaks in money and numbers. You reminded me that meaning matters. She smiled faintly. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me about a grammar correction. He laughed softly. Then I'll try to top it. She turned toward the door. Good night, Reed. As she disappeared inside, he watched the snow gather on her steps, small, deliberate, silent. And for the first time in a decade, Reed Langston wondered whether understanding someone could be more dangerous than competing with them. Camille arrived at the office on Monday to find her access card deactivated. The security guard checked twice, frowned and said, It's marked as temporary, ma'am. She kept her expression calm. Then you might want to tell whoever marked it that I'm not temporary. She called upstairs, waited in the lobby for 15 minutes, and was finally met by Daniel Koenig, looking far too pleased with himself. Apologies, he said smoothly. Must be a clerical error. Clerical, she repeated, following him toward the elevator. You mean deliberate. He smiled without warmth. Careful, Ms. Doyle. We value precision here. She stepped into the elevator, folded her arms, and said evenly, Then you'll appreciate this. I can tell when someone is trying to erase me. It usually starts with revoked access. Koenig's eyes flicked toward the camera in the corner. You're quite perceptive. Occupational hazard. When the doors opened, Camille didn't wait for him. She went straight to her office, powered on her laptop, and began rewriting her notes from memory. If they wanted to push her out quietly, she wasn't going to make it easy. 2 hours later, Reed Langston stormed in like a controlled explosion. Who locked you out? He demanded. Camille didn't look up from her screen. I assume you already know. His voice was low, dangerous. Koenig, I can handle him. That's not the point. She finally met his gaze. Then what is? He exhaled through his nose, pacing once before stopping. You shouldn't have to handle him. You're here because I trust your judgment, and he doesn't like what he can't control. Then stop letting him control the narrative. Reed's eyes sharpened, not anger, but something close to respect. You think I'm letting him? I think you're used to fighting people in boardrooms, she said quietly, not in the shadows. That silenced him. By afternoon, an email circulated through the office. Anonymous sender. Subject, conflict of interest inquiry. Certain recent hires may not meet corporate neutrality standards. Unverified personal connections to executive leadership under review. The subtext was obvious. Reed read it in his office, jaw tight. When Camille knocked, he slid the screen aside, face unreadable. They're coming for both of us now. Then we stop reacting, she said. We act first. He tilted his head. You have something in mind. She sat opposite him, calm as ever. Language shapes perception. They're using implication because it's safer than accusation. So we change the words they use. How? Transparency, she said. Make the review public. Announce it yourself. Strip them of the power to whisper. He stared at her for a long moment, then leaned back. You realize what that would cost. Less than your silence. That night, Reed drafted a statement. Not written by PR, not polished by lawyers. Just him. Langston Biotech was built on integrity, not immunity. All internal processes, including executive hires, are open for review. Transparency is not an admission of guilt, it's proof of trust. He sent it directly to the board before midnight. By morning, the press had it. Koenig cornered Camille near the elevator, his composure cracking for the first time. You did this. She met his glare. He did it. I just reminded him how to use his own voice. You're destroying years of corporate order. No, she said evenly. I'm translating it into something human. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't belong here, Ms. Doyle. People like you never last. Camille smiled faintly. Funny, that's what I keep proving wrong. Later that evening, Reed found her sitting in the atrium, watching snow fall through the glass roof. He sat beside her, silent for a while before speaking. You could have stayed out of this, he said. Let me take the fallout. You think I help people for sport? He almost smiled. You help people who don't deserve it. She glanced at him. Do you think you don't? He hesitated. I think I've forgotten what it feels like to earn forgiveness. That's not what this is, she said softly. It's accountability. It's different. He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted behind his guarded expression. You know, you might be the only person in this company who talks to me like I'm not a headline. That's because I don't read headlines, she replied. I read people. The next morning, a quiet revolution began. Departments started forwarding multilingual compliance documents for review. Not because Reed ordered it, but because Camille's name was attached. Even Koenig's division, reluctantly, began to defer to her notes. She didn't gloat. She just worked. Reed watched from his office window as she crossed the courtyard, snowflakes catching in her hair. He felt something unfamiliar. Not attraction alone, but admiration steeped in unease. She had changed the tone of his company with nothing more than honesty, and that terrified him more than any board meeting ever had. That night, Reed called her before she could leave. Camille, he said quietly, how do you keep doing it? Doing what? Walking into rooms that want to erase you, and staying. Her voice was calm, but her answer landed like truth. Because if I leave every room that underestimates me, I'll never change the conversation. Reed didn't speak for several seconds. Then don't leave. I wasn't planning to. He exhaled. Relief, respect, something in between. Good, because I have a feeling we've only just started rewriting the story. The invitation arrived without preamble, handwritten on thick ivory paper. Need you in Geneva. It's not business. Our Camille stared at it for several minutes. No company logo, no agenda, no reason. Just Reed's deliberate handwriting. Steady, minimalist, and impossible to misinterpret. She almost didn't go. Almost. But something about the note, its lack of armor, made her pack a suitcase. The Geneva train cut through the snow like a quiet blade. Outside the window, the Alps blurred into watercolor gray, and Camille found herself rehearsing what she'd say if this turned out to be a mistake. She never found the words. When she stepped off the platform, Reed was already there, coat collar turned up against the cold, holding 2 coffees like it was the most natural thing in the world. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I wasn't sure I should, she replied. Yet here you are. And here you are, she countered. A billionaire standing in a public train station. That must be a first. His mouth curved. I've had worse meetings. Is that what this is? He hesitated. No, not this time. They walked through the old town, past shuttered bakeries and church bells echoing across the frozen river. Reed stopped at a narrow cafe with red chairs outside, the only spot with warmth spilling through its windows. This place, he said, holding the door for her, was my mother's favorite. She believed people spoke more truth when the tables were small. Camille smiled faintly. That explains your office layout. He laughed under his breath. Touché. Inside, they took a corner table. The waitress greeted him in French. He replied politely but clumsily. Camille corrected his phrasing without thinking. Reed grinned. You can't help yourself, can you? I'm pathologically accurate, and I'm pathologically stubborn. That's why this should be interesting. He tilted his head. You think we're interesting? I think you're about to tell me why you really brought me here, she said, wrapping her hands around the coffee cup. For a moment, Reed said nothing. Then, because I've spent my life building something that speaks in numbers, and lately, numbers feel like the wrong language. Camille frowned. You brought me to Geneva to talk about feelings? Interpret it however you want. For the next hour, they didn't talk business. They talked about everything else. The price of silence, the way language shapes grief, the difference between listening and waiting to reply. Reed told her about his mother, a diplomat who used words like bandages, who died believing empathy was stronger than policy. She used to say, he murmured, that precision without compassion is just control. And now, Camille asked. He looked out the window. Now I finally understand what she meant. Camille's voice softened. That's a hard language to learn. He turned back to her, eyes steady. And you're fluent in it. They left the cafe after dusk, the city glowing gold against the snow. Reed led her through quiet streets until they reached the lakeside. The water shimmered like mercury under the winter moon. She used to bring me here, he said quietly, when I couldn't sleep. She said the lake teaches patience. Nothing moves fast, but everything reflects. Camille folded her arms against the cold. You don't strike me as patient. Not until I met you. She froze. The words weren't rehearsed. They carried the raw, uneven weight of truth. Reed, I'm not asking for anything, he interrupted softly. You've already given me more than you realize. She searched his face, trying to find the hidden agenda, the motive. There wasn't one. Only sincerity, and that terrified her more than any boardroom ambush ever could. You're used to people who want something from you, she said, and you're used to people underestimating you. They stood there, silence hanging between them, the rare kind that didn't demand to be filled. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her hotel door. Take tomorrow off. I'll be at the cafe with the red chairs. When she arrived, he wasn't alone. He was sitting with a little girl, maybe 6, who was teaching him French pronunciation by reading a children's book aloud. Reed looked up when Camille approached. My goddaughter, Lila. She's the only person in this city who corrects me more than you do. Lila giggled. You said fromage like it was a disease. Camille laughed, sitting down. He does that. Chronic case of misplaced vowels. The girl nodded sagely. He needs lessons. Reed glanced at Camille. See? Consensus achieved. The scene felt disarmingly ordinary. No suits, no hierarchy, just laughter and coffee and warmth. When Lila's mother came to collect her, Reed watched her go, quiet again. She reminds me of my mother, he said, unafraid to tell the truth. Then you're lucky, Camille said softly. Most people forget how. He turned toward her. And you haven't? Not yet. Then stay that way, he murmured, even if it scares everyone else. That night, back in her hotel room, Camille stared at her reflection in the window. Geneva glittering behind her like a city dreaming. She should have felt out of place, a teacher among titans. But instead she felt something unsettling, seen. Reed Langston hadn't asked her to translate his company this time. He'd asked her to translate him, and the strangest part was, she already had. The following morning, Geneva woke beneath a thin layer of fog, the kind that made the city look like it was holding its breath. Camille stood on her balcony, coffee in hand, watching the lake fade in and out of sight. She hadn't seen Reed since the cafe. His note had been brief, his tone uncertain. Let's take a day apart. Clarity needs space. It wasn't rejection, it was reflection. but the silence still unsettled her. By noon, she couldn't bear the stillness anymore. She walked through the cobbled streets until she reached the Langston Biotech satellite office, the one Reed rarely used but had insisted she visit. Inside, the receptionist looked startled. "Ms. Doyle, Mr. Langston left something for you." A single envelope. Reed's handwriting again. "You once said words shouldn't hide meaning, so here's mine. Meet me at the Piermont Hotel, 7 p.m. No business, just truth." Camille exhaled slowly, her pulse tightening with a mix of curiosity and fear. She wasn't afraid of Reed. She was afraid of what his honesty might uncover in herself. The Piermont overlooked the lake, all glass and understated luxury. When she arrived, Reed was already waiting in the rooftop lounge, sleeves rolled to his forearms, the city reflected in the windows behind him. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Not the CEO, not the strategist, but a man who looked unguarded for once. "You came," he said quietly. "I almost didn't." "Why?" "Because I don't know what this is anymore." He nodded slowly. "Neither do I. That's why I needed tonight." They sat across from each other, two glasses between them, neither drinking. The air hummed with something unnamed. Reed broke the silence first. "When I met you on that flight, I thought you were a curiosity, a puzzle, someone whose intelligence I could quantify. I was wrong." Camille's voice was steady. "And now? Now I think you're the only person who doesn't want anything from me." "That's not true," she said softly. "I want clarity. I want honesty. I want—" She stopped herself. Reed leaned forward. "Say it." "I want this to mean something," she finished. "Not just another chapter in your list of temporary alliances." His expression tightened, not in anger, but in pain. "You think that's what this is? I think you're used to control, and I don't fit into systems that need taming." He looked at her for a long time, then exhaled. "You're right." The simplicity of it disarmed her. Reed rose from his seat and walked to the window, his reflection merging with the glittering city lights. "All my life, I've built things that obey me. Companies, contracts, outcomes. You're the first person who refuses to." Camille stood, crossing to his side. "Maybe that's because I don't want to be owned." He turned toward her. "And maybe that's why I trust you." The words landed softly but cut deep. They left the lounge and stepped out onto the rooftop terrace. The wind carried the scent of snow and lake water. Geneva glimmered below, an ocean of lights against the night. "Do you ever regret it?" Camille asked quietly. "Regret what?" "The version of yourself you had to become to survive this world." He hesitated. "Every day. But regret is a luxury in my position. It doesn't build, it only remembers." "Then maybe you've been remembering in the wrong language," she said. He smiled faintly. "Translate it for me." She met his gaze. "You keep trying to fix things with precision. Maybe it's time to start with compassion." The wind stirred between them. He stepped closer, not invading, not demanding, just near enough that the space between their words evaporated. "Camille," he said quietly, "you once told me words have consequences." "They do." "Then tell me what happens next." She hesitated, heart pounding. "That depends on whether you want a translation or the truth." "I want both." She took a deep breath. "Then here it is. I don't trust power, but I trust you more than I should. And I hate that, because I don't want to need you to make what I say matter." Reed's voice was barely a whisper. "You don't. You already do." The honesty between them settled like snow. Silent, heavy, beautiful. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Hours later, they sat side by side on the balcony outside his suite, sharing the same blanket, watching dawn creep across the lake. Neither spoke for a long time. It wasn't necessary. When the first light touched the horizon, Reed finally said, "You know this changes everything." Camille nodded. "Then let it. You're not afraid?" "Of what?" "Of what they'll say." She smiled faintly. "I've been called worse things than honest." Reed laughed quietly, the sound soft and unfamiliar. "I think I finally understand what my mother meant when she said diplomacy isn't about speaking. It's about listening until it hurts. And does it? He turned toward her. Only when you're the one speaking. The sun rose higher, gilding the water in silver. They didn't move, didn't explain, didn't define what had begun between them. They simply existed. Two people who had spent their lives translating others, finally learning how to be understood. The morning after Geneva did not feel like aftermath. It felt like suspension. Camille awoke to the faint hum of traffic and the scent of espresso drifting through the open balcony door. For a moment she didn't move. The previous night replayed in fragments. Words that weren't quite confessions, silences that said too much. Reed had left before dawn, leaving behind a note on the table. Meeting in Zurich. Didn't want to wake you. Don't disappear. She smiled faintly. As if I could. But even as she folded the note, a chill of uncertainty crept in. She'd told herself last night was clarity. The moment where masks fell and truth took shape. Yet truth, she knew, rarely stayed still. By the time she arrived back in Zurich, the mood had shifted. The office buzzed with tension. Conversations dropped when she walked past. Screens dimmed, whispers trailed behind her. She found Elena, the usually cheerful communications director, by the coffee machine. Elena, what's going on? Elena hesitated. You haven't seen the news? Camille frowned. No, should I have? Elena bit her lip, then turned her tablet toward her. On the screen, a headline. Langston Biotech executive accused of nepotism. Secret relationship with new consultant under review. Below it, a blurred photo. Camille. Walking out of the Piermont with Reed, his hand briefly on her shoulder. Her stomach dropped. Elena, she said slowly, who leaked this? No one knows. The board's panicking. Koenig's already called an emergency session. Of course he had. She found Reed pacing in his office, the blinds half closed, light slicing through the room in uneven bars. He looked up as she entered. I was going to call you. I'm sure you were, she said coldly, tossing the tablet onto his desk. So which one of your trusted advisors did it? He rubbed a hand over his face. My guess? Koenig. He's been waiting for leverage. And now he has it. Reed's eyes softened. Camille, listen to me. No, she snapped. You don't get to tell me to listen right now. You asked me to trust you, and I did. I defended you, Reed. I walked into rooms that hated me because I believed in what we were building. You still should. Why? So they can tear me apart for your reputation? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I can fix this. By denying it? By controlling the narrative. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. You can't translate truth into PR, Reed. For a moment his composure cracked. Then what do you want me to do? She met his gaze, unflinching. Tell them the truth, that you trusted me because I earned it, that what we built was real, in work and beyond it. His silence said everything. She shook her head. That's what I thought. By evening, her name had disappeared from internal systems, emails rerouted, access revoked. Again. No one spoke to her directly, but she didn't need words to understand. In corporate language, silence was the loudest sentence. She packed her things quietly, the office lights flickering above her. When she reached the elevator, Elena appeared, eyes glossy. They said it's just temporary, Elena whispered. Camille forced a smile. Everything is. That night she sat in her apartment, half-finished tea cooling beside her, staring at the unread message on her phone. Reed. Please don't shut me out. I'm doing what I can. She didn't reply. The irony wasn't lost on her, that the man who taught her power could still be powerless against perception. Words were weapons, and someone had just rewritten her story without consent. She opened her laptop and began typing, not an email, but something raw. A statement addressed to no one and everyone. Language is power, but silence is complicity. I won't let mine be used as evidence. I've spent my life translating meaning. Now I'll define my own. When she finished, she didn't post it. She saved it. For later. 2 days passed before Reed showed up at her apartment. He looked nothing like the man from the boardroom. Jacket wrinkled, tie gone, exhaustion etched into every movement. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly, I couldn't stay away. Is that guilt or strategy? Neither, he said. It's regret. She folded her arms. They fired me, didn't they? Suspended. Until the inquiry ends. And you? He hesitated. The board demanded I step back from operations. Temporary. So we're both ghosts now. He didn't deny it. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Reed said, they can take everything from me, Camille. Money, position, name. But I won't let them define you as a mistake. She looked at him, eyes glistening. Then stop acting like one. Reed took a step forward, his voice barely audible. You told me truth had consequences. Maybe this is ours. Maybe, she whispered, but consequences don't mean endings. He reached out, not to pull her close, but to steady her trembling hand. I'll fight this, he said, for both of us. She met his gaze, weary but resolute. Then start by telling the truth, not to the board, not to the press, but to yourself. Reed nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. I will. When he left, Camille closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. For the first time, she didn't feel like the woman caught in a billionaire's story. She felt like the one rewriting it. The snow had stopped, but the cold hadn't. It clung to the windows of Langston Biotech's Zurich Tower, turning every pane into a muted mirror. Inside, Camille worked long after everyone else had gone home, drowning herself in revisions. The silence helped. It was safer than thinking about Reed. She hadn't seen him since their confrontation in her apartment, since she'd told him to tell the truth. He had disappeared into meetings and press statements, trying to clean up the narrative she refused to be part of. Still, every few hours her phone buzzed with his name. Unread messages stacked like unanswered questions. She didn't open them. It was nearly midnight when the elevator doors opened. Camille didn't look up. She didn't have to. Only one person moved through a room with that particular calm that felt like tension folded in half. Working late again, Reed said quietly. I could say the same. I wasn't sure you'd still be here. I wasn't sure you'd come back, she said, still typing. He stepped closer. You told me to tell the truth. That's not an apology. It's a beginning. She stopped typing. Slowly, she turned in her chair. Then start talking. Reed's hands rested on the edge of her desk. I told the board everything. That you weren't a personal hire. That every decision you influenced was backed by measurable improvement. I told them you were the reason the European division survived the audit. And they believed you? Not yet, but they're listening. Camille studied him. Listening isn't the same as understanding. I know, he said softly. You taught me that. He sat across from her, exhaustion visible in the small details. The loosened tie, the uneven rhythm of his breathing. Koenig's pushing for your full dismissal, Reed said. He's framing it as a breach of neutrality. Camille gave a humorless laugh. So defending integrity is now a conflict of interest. He's using words as weapons, Reed said. Exactly the way you warned me people would. Then use truth as your countermeasure. I'm trying, he said, but the truth isn't enough when people want blood. Camille leaned back. Then maybe it's time to stop defending and start defining. Reed frowned. Define what? Us. The work. The message. All of it. He hesitated. If we define it, we make it real. And if it's real, they can destroy it. Or, she said quietly, they can't ignore it anymore. The next morning, the board meeting convened. Reed didn't invite her, but she came anyway. The security guard at the door tried to stop her, until Reed's voice came from inside. She's with me. Heads turned as Camille entered the glass-walled conference room. 12 executives sat in a semicircle, each with a tablet, each pretending not to know her name. Reed stood at the front. You've all read the allegations. You've seen the photos. But what you haven't seen, he said, glancing at Camille, is the truth. Koenig leaned forward, voice sharp. Mr. Langston, this isn't the place for sentiment. No, Reed replied evenly. It's the place for accountability, and that starts with transparency. He turned on the screen behind him, a presentation Camille had never seen before. Slide after slide displayed her revisions, her notes, her translation corrections. Every place she'd fixed a loophole, every policy she'd rewritten for ethical clarity. These are her contributions, Reed said. Every single one verified, time-stamped, and implemented. Koenig scoffed. You think parading her edits absolves you of misconduct? Reed didn't flinch. I think integrity isn't misconduct. I think truth doesn't need permission to exist. The room went silent. Camille met Reed's gaze. He wasn't performing. He wasn't defending her. He was simply, finally, telling the truth. After the meeting, she found him alone in the hallway, shoulders slumped in the rare posture of someone who'd fought the right battle, regardless of the outcome. They didn't vote, he said quietly. They're postponing the decision. It's a start, she said. He turned to her, eyes weary but bright. You didn't have to come today. I didn't come for them, she said. I came to see if you'd actually mean what you said. And did I? Yes, she said softly. For once, you didn't translate truth into strategy. He smiled faintly. That's your influence. Don't give me credit for doing what you should have done years ago. I'm not giving credit, he said. I'm giving thanks. That night, Reed showed up at her apartment with takeout and 2 bottles of wine. I thought we'd earned a quiet evening, he said. Camille raised an eyebrow. You brought food instead of apologies. That's new. I'm learning your language. Which one? The one that doesn't need fixing. She almost smiled. They ate in comfortable silence. For once, there were no power plays, no hidden meanings, just laughter over burnt dumplings and the slow thaw of 2 people who had forgotten what simplicity felt like. At one point, Reed leaned back and said, You know, I used to think fluency was knowing the right words. And now, she asked, now I think it's knowing when not to speak. Camille's voice softened. And when is that? He looked at her, eyes steady. Now. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her. He just let the silence between them become a bridge instead of a wall. Outside, the city lights flickered across her window like reflections of everything they'd both been. Ambitious, flawed, searching. For the first time, she didn't feel like the woman saved by a billionaire. She felt like the equal who had taught him how to listen. The boardroom felt colder than usual, not because of the temperature, but because of what hung in the air. Anticipation sharpened into knives. Camille stood outside the glass doors, watching through the reflection as Reed faced 12 people who measured worth in numbers and weakness in empathy. She wasn't supposed to be here. The email had said closed session, but this story, she realized, had stopped belonging to them the moment it began. Inside, Reed spoke with calm precision. Langston Biotech isn't under threat because of an alleged relationship. It's under threat because we've forgotten what integrity sounds like. The room remained silent. Koenig sat near the center, his posture coiled like a spring. You're deflecting, Reed. The issue is your judgment. You hired an unqualified consultant with no corporate experience and gave her influence over regulatory language. Reed met his gaze. And that unqualified consultant prevented an international lawsuit. A few board members shifted, uncomfortable. Koenig pressed harder. You're jeopardizing this company for a woman who taught me more about truth than this room ever did, Reed interrupted. The silence that followed was deafening. Camille could see his hands, steady, deliberate, the way they always were when he was about to break a pattern. The doors opened an hour later. Executives filed out, whispering to one another. No one looked at Camille directly, though a few glanced her way, curiosity tinged with something like fear. Then Reed appeared. He looked exhausted but unbroken. Well, she asked. He exhaled. They voted. And? They'll clear you, but they want me to resign. Her breath caught. Resign? He nodded. Effective immediately. Camille stared at him, struggling to find words. Reed, you can't. I can, he said quietly. And I did. She took a step closer. You built this company. And I'll build something better, he said. Something that doesn't punish truth for being inconvenient. Her eyes stung. You didn't have to do this for me? He smiled faintly. I didn't. I did it for the man I should have been all along. That evening, the press release went out. Langston Biotech announces leadership transition. CEO Reed Langston steps down following internal restructuring. The statement was diplomatic, sterile, perfect, the kind of language Reed used to detest. But this time, it wasn't his words. Camille read it from her apartment window, the city lights blurring through the glass. She felt both grief and liberation, tangled in the same breath. A knock at the door pulled her from thought. She knew who it was before opening it. Reed stood there, coat unbuttoned, hair damp from the snow. "I don't have anywhere to be tomorrow," he said simply. "Come in," she murmured. They sat at her kitchen table, the same one where he'd once made her promise to stay. Now everything felt quieter, stripped of power, rank, pretense. "I keep thinking about what you said," he began, "that I translate everything into strategy. You were right. I didn't know how to speak honestly until I met you." Camille gave a soft, sad smile. "You always knew. You just didn't trust yourself to be understood." He nodded slowly. "I used to think leadership meant never needing help, but maybe it means knowing when to listen." "Congratulations," she said, voice warm but teasing. "You're finally bilingual." He chuckled, though the sound was fragile. "You know, when all this started, I thought you were just a woman who spoke 7 languages. Turns out you were fluent in humanity too." Camille looked at him across the table, the distance between them smaller than ever. "And what language are we speaking now?" He hesitated. "The kind that doesn't need words." The next morning the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Zurich glittered like glass. Fragile, temporary, beautiful. Reed packed what little he'd kept in his office. No speeches, no farewell, just quiet closure. As he was leaving, Elena approached. "They're already spinning a new narrative," she said. "They'll say you fell, not that you chose to jump." Reed smiled faintly. "Then let them. The truth doesn't need a headline." Outside, Camille was waiting by the steps. She looked out of place amid the polished marble and power suits. Simple coat, tired eyes, steady heart. "Leaving without saying goodbye?" she asked. "I thought we already did that." She shook her head. "Not properly." He handed her a folder. Inside were papers. Her contract termination reversed, her name restored. "You're reinstated," he said. "Not because you need my permission, but because your work deserves to stay." Camille blinked back emotion. "Reed, this isn't fair to you." "It's not supposed to be," he replied. "It's supposed to be right." They stood there for a long moment, the world moving around them. Executives rushing past, cars humming, snow melting quietly in the gutters. Finally, Camille said, "What will you do now?" He smiled. "Listen, maybe build something new, something that starts with meaning, not profit." She tilted her head. "And if I said I'd like to be part of that?" His gaze softened. "Then it wouldn't just be rebuilding, it would be beginning." As he turned to leave, Camille called after him. "Reed." He paused. "You once said truth doesn't need permission. Don't forget, neither do you." He nodded, the faintest trace of gratitude in his smile. "You taught me that." She watched him walk away into the morning light. No longer a CEO, no longer a man defined by power, but one finally fluent in his own humanity. For the first time in years, Camille didn't feel like a translator. She felt like the author of her own story. And maybe, she thought, that was the only language that ever truly mattered. Spring arrived quietly in Zurich. The city thawed, the lake shimmered brighter, and for the first time in months, Camille let herself exhale without waiting for the world to collapse. Her days returned to rhythm, teaching, translating, walking Noah to school through streets lined with cherry blossoms. The scandal had faded into memory, reduced to a few archived articles and whispers that no one remembered to repeat. But Reed Langston had vanished from the headlines entirely. She told herself that was good, that anonymity suited him better than fame. Still, some nights when the city was too still, she caught herself listening for footsteps that never came. It was on one such evening, as she graded papers by the window, that her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Are you still allergic to formal dinners?" Camille stared at the message, her heart stumbling. "Depends." "Who's asking?" "Unknown number. Someone who owes you more than a thank you." She typed slower this time. "If this is another journalist?" "Unknown number. It's not. Meet me at the red chairs." She smiled despite herself. The cafe looked exactly as it had in Geneva. Small tables, faded red chairs, and the same old waitress who greeted her with recognition. Reed was already there, sitting by the window, no suit, no entourage, just him. For a moment, Camille stayed by the door, watching him unnoticed. He looked different, freer perhaps. The lines of ambition around his eyes had softened into something more human. When he finally saw her, his smile was quiet, genuine. "You came." "I was curious," she said. "That's all." He raised an eyebrow. "Curiosity's a good start." They ordered coffee. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't tense. It was something gentler, like the echo of understanding that didn't need to prove itself anymore. Finally, Camille said, "You disappeared." "I needed to," Reed replied. "After I left Langston, I spent a few months in Indonesia, volunteering with a medical outreach program. No cameras, no press, just listening again." She smiled faintly. "You listening? I'll need evidence." He laughed softly. "Fair, I brought some." He slid a small notebook across the table, filled with notes, sketches, and sentences written in half a dozen languages. Each page translated a different word. Trust, repair, beginning. "You're still learning," she said. "Always," he replied. "You were right. Language isn't about fluency. It's about intention." "And what's your intention now?" He met her eyes, steady but careful. "To build something new, smaller, honest. I don't want another empire. I want a conversation." Camille stirred her coffee. "And you came here to tell me that?" "No," he said softly. "I came to ask if you'd help me build it." They walked along the lake after sunset, the city glowing behind them. Reed spoke about his new project, an independent foundation dedicated to ethical communication in biotech, policy, and translation. "Words decide everything," he said. "How laws are written, how medicine is tested, how lives are valued. I want to make sure the right people are defining them." "You sound like me," Camille said. "I had a good teacher." She smiled, though her tone was cautious. "And what makes you think I'd say yes?" "Because you care about meaning," he said, "and because you're not afraid to challenge me." She stopped walking. "Reed, we can't pretend last year didn't happen." "I'm not pretending," he said. "I'm just hoping that maybe the story doesn't have to end there." Her voice softened. "You stepped down for me. That's not something I forget easily." He shook his head. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because, for once, I wanted to be the man my choices pointed to, not the mask my title required." Camille looked out over the water, its surface glimmering with light. "You've changed." "So have you." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I just stopped apologizing for the space I take up." He smiled. "Good. The world needs more of that." They stood side by side, the silence between them no longer empty but full of all the things they'd said and the things they no longer needed to. A month later, Camille stood in a small office overlooking the same Zurich streets that had once felt like a battlefield. Only now, the sign on the door read, "The Language of Impact Foundation, founded by Reed Langston and Camille Doyle." Inside, the walls were lined with books in different languages, the air filled with quiet possibility. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, building a tower from colored blocks, while Reed adjusted a framed photo of their team, a handful of linguists, ethicists, and young translators eager to make their mark. "Not bad for a couple of disgraced professionals," he joked. Camille smirked. "Speak for yourself. I was never disgraced. Merely misunderstood." Reed laughed, setting the frame straight. "You know, for a woman who lives by precision, you're remarkably flexible with definitions." "That's because language evolves," she said. "And so do we." Their eyes met. Neither looked away. Outside, the church bells began to ring, a sound that once marked deadlines and endings but now seemed to signal only beginnings. Camille turned to the window, watching the light spill over the lake. "Reed," she said quietly, "do you ever miss it? The power? The control?" He shook his head. "Not for a second. I traded control for connection. Best deal I ever made." She smiled. "Then maybe you finally learned the right language." Reed's voice was gentle. "Only because you taught it to me." He reached for her hand, not with urgency, but with understanding. And for once, Camille didn't resist. That evening, as they locked up the office, a soft rain began to fall. The city glowed in reflection, every droplet catching the light like punctuation. Camille looked up at the sky, then at the man beside her. "Funny," she said, "how everything we tried to escape led us right here." Reed smiled. Maybe we weren't escaping. Maybe we were translating. And as they walked through the rain, side by side, neither one looked back, because some stories, when finally told in the right language, don't need an ending at all.